Hi, this is Stephen Mead. Over the years, I've read hundreds of books and spent thousands of hours developing what I call the bullseye belief system. And I've used that system to develop my own companies, as well as help others learn to be specific, targeted, and focused to get exactly what they want in life. This is the Bullseye Guy podcast. Stephen Mead back again with another Bullseye Guy podcast. I have my virtual backgrounds going. I specifically have Monaco, boat show, a bunch of people on the boat, and there's a reason for that. And part of that's going to be the conversation we have with Alex Lightman. Finally got Alex locked down. Alex is a international traveler. I've known Alex for well over a decade. Alex has written some amazing books. I would call him a futurist, a globalist. I actually as well would call him a predictor, meaning he's one of these people that actually puts predictions out there and almost all of them come true. Unlike a lot of people who don't want to put their name to something, Alex has been amazing with sort of the direction of where things are going. He's written on 5G, a lot of stuff going on now around Corona. So I'm going to bring Alex in. Alex, you're muted. As soon as you come off mute, we're going to jump right in and get started. I don't know how you want to introduce yourself, Alex, so why don't you just give us the Alex Lightman overview?
Okay. I was born in Hollywood, and I've done talks, including one recently called It Came from Hollywood. So when you think of It Came from Hollywood, think of me. And I went to MIT and Harvard, and so I have an East Coast as well as a West Coast kind of way of looking at the world. I've lived in England, I've lived in Germany, I've lived in India. I've been to 88 countries. The last country I visited was Russia. Spent time in January in Moscow, had a fabulous time. And I do like to explore the future and think of the future. I don't think I've been wrong in any of my written predictions. And lately people have taken exception to some things and made bets. One person that we both know made me a $20,000 bet. He lost and he still hasn't paid me. So yeah. People find it very infuriating how some people can see the future and other people can't.
Yeah, so let's actually go backwards because we're still in the middle of Corona quarantine. That's why Alex and I are at Zoom. Otherwise, we'd be
we're not in the middle of it.
Well, I'll get your opinion of whether we're at the beginning of the end of the beginning, the beginning of the middle. Let's just say we're still in somewhat of a quarantine. That's why we're on Zoom. But I want to back up, Alex. You've actually written some interesting books that have come true around wireless and IPv6 and even around Cuba. Like there's things that you've written years ago that have come true. What was one of the first books that you wrote, and what were some of the early things you saw about technology that got you excited that have come true today?
So I've written a lot more articles than I have books. I've written 4 books under my own name. The last one was with Brett King. It was an Amazon bestseller. But I've written a lot of magazine articles. And the first article I wrote was published June 1985. It was the cover story of the Futurist magazine. And it was called Pixel Power, the Graphic Revolution in Computers. And what it said is that we're going to communicate through small handheld computers through a graphic symbolic language like hieroglyphics. And so I'm actually very proud of that because every time that I see somebody send me a message that's all emojis, I get this kind of a thrill from it. So people go, well, why would you take the risk of predicting the future? And the answer is because you get this sensual pleasure of being right because you can be wrong. And anytime that you can be wrong, and we're filled with a world where people are trying to go, gotcha, zap. And they want to say, you got that wrong, you got that wrong. So it's kind of like a high wire act to put these predictions out, especially ones that are unpopular or that just seem wild and crazy. And then you're right or you're wrong. And it's very, very clear. So, and that's why I like making bets with people. So that was the first one. The first book was the Brave New Unwired World, the Digital Big Bang and the Infinite Internet. Yeah. And that was the first book on 4G. And that's what got me my favorite award, the Economist Magazine Readers Award. It was voted on by people all around the world. And Elon Musk and 5 other people were up for this prize. And so I beat Elon Musk in a vote of the whole world over who's made an innovation that will change the world the most. So I feel pretty good about that since he's in the news every day.
Yeah, let's talk about that one, because I was given that book by you and I read it, but talk about the year that you wrote it and what some of your predictions were, because when we sit in the environment today, things seem so obvious, but even something as simple as the emojis, talk about the 4G and the unwired, and
Well,
then I want
sure.
to move
So
forward to the next stuff.
the big aspect was the book is that you have these massive commercial battles. So you're the bullseye guy. And I think that title is interesting because it bespeaks both of military and business. And it's like, can you make a target? You know, the idea of a target, hitting a target, well, that's from archery. And we think about the English archers versus the French at Agincourt. You know, the English archers were so good, they could send their arrows more than a kilometer. I mean, when the French would capture them, they'd cut off their fingers so they couldn't pull their bowstring. And so basically it talks about this war between, on the one hand, the communications business, which had been around since AT&T, Theodore Vail and all that, and which had a lot of assets, a lot of employees, and the computer business, which is more of an upstart business. And what I basically said is, as these things clashed, the computer business would take over and absorb a lot of the telecommunications business. So really what we see with Zoom is kind of the computer business gobbling up. Mark Andreessen talks about software eating the world. We're on a Zoom call. This is software eating the world of the telcos. And part of it is that you can just look at who's improving faster. So if you have one business that's moving at Moore's law, you're doubling the processing power, you know, every year or so. It used to be the number of chips, the density of chips. That was the original formulation by Gordon Moore, who became the richest man in California. So anytime you can have a law from a guy who becomes the primus inter pares, the first among equals, that's pretty impressive. And you should kind of look at it, because it's easy to be a nerd who doesn't have success, and it's easy to be successful without any real consciousness of it. But if you can give your metric, you can give your equation, you can give your definitions and allow other people to be successful with you, that way you can have a whole culture kind of rise up. And so that book said that there was a shift between the that 1G, 2G, 3G were in the license spectrum, and there were standards set in the dark in closed rooms by carriers, and basically it was just the telcos that could be successful. And what I said is that 4G would be different because the standards would be set in the open. A lot of the growth would be in the open part of the spectrum, and lots of companies could become telcos. And so I specifically gave the example. I wrote the book in 2001 of Apple Computer, and I basically said that Apple was the company that saved us from AT&T trying to use its lobbying power, which it's indescribable today how weak AT&T is compared to what it used to be. But AT&T was trying to use its lobbying power to crush the 900 megahertz, 2.4 gigahertz, 5.7 gigahertz, basically the little tiny open spectrum places, and trying to close that so nobody could come in. And Apple was the one company that said to the FCC, no, don't close that, because that's where a lot of innovation is going to take place. So Apple knew that it wanted to become a telecommunications company or a telecommunications adjacent company back in 2001 by signaling this. So you can, I guess I look for where smart people are doing things that seem like they're not staying in their lane. One of my favorite lines from the Walking Dead TV series is when this woman is having a fight, and she kicks someone else down the elevator and says, "Stay in your lane, bitch." And so it's like, I like it when somebody is not in their lane. So if somebody's supposed to be on land, what are they doing in the water? If they're supposed to be in the water, what are they doing up in the air? Where people are jumping out of their lane, it sometimes means there's going to be a whole different sea change.
So let's talk about switching lanes. I'm going to switch one lane and then another, but those two lanes kind of converge, because you've actually stepped out on a limb or a pier or a dock or a gangplank, whatever we want to call it, around Cuba. Like, you've written some really fascinating things around ending the embargo of Cuba. And I know that some sort of started coming true, some still can. What was your interest in Cuba and how did you move to Cuba? And then we'll make the leap to the next country that I know you'll probably figure out where I'm going to go with you.
Sure. Well, I'm a capitalist and I was born in California. However, I don't like bullying. I don't like bullying of big kids over small kids. I used to have my own preschool, my own high school, my own college. I set up in New Mexico with a partner on 126 acres, and which got accredited. I could, offer the education visas and all that. And I'm very proud that these kids, after they got their head straight, they never picked on each other. I didn't have discipline problems. I didn't have drug problems after the first year. But pretty much you have to remove fear and remove bullying from that. And I don't like the United States, this shining city on a hill, bullying other countries. And if you look at the history of how the United States has treated Cuba, it's awful. When Cuba was trying to break free of the Spanish Empire, they took a lot of inspiration from our Civil War, and they said, hey guys, we're trying to break free of Spain, help us out here. And we actually screwed them over. There are multiple civil wars. And right when they were about to beat Spain, Teddy Roosevelt did a charge up San Juan Hill and said, okay, I won the war. Meanwhile, they had been fighting and dying for decades, 3 decades. So that's just the tiniest microcosm of what you would learn if you read the book in the first part of it. But I think that the U.S. embargo of Cuba is a failure. It's been going on for almost 60 years. It hasn't achieved any goals. The goals keep changing. And it's just a microcosm of bad U.S. policy that's bipartisan. So you have 12 different administrations that have all gone in. And every year, the embargo has to be re-signed every September. And Obama actually ran for office for the Senate saying, if you elect me, I'll end the U.S. embargo of Cuba. So I actually, said, well, what are you doing about this? And I was hired by the White House to work on it. And as a result of this and some sponsorship from a colleague I was working with at the time, I was able to write a book about this. And the book had 2 goals. One of the 2 goals was achieved, and that is to resume diplomatic relations with the U.S. and Cuba, because it makes no sense for me that the United States would have no diplomatic relations with a country that is closer to us than 2 of our states and is closer to Washington, D.C. than, half our states. And it's a country that is a biotech superpower. And what I said in the book, and which I will say to you today, I've had no reason to change anything in there, that I believe more than 10,000 Americans a year die because they don't have access to medicines from Cuba, and they don't have access to doctors and hospitals at Cuban prices, which are very, very low. So it'd be a lot easier. You would actually reduce the cost of medical care for Florida, which has the highest percentage of people who are senior citizens there, at least for part of the year. And Cuba has treatment for COVID-19 that China's been using since day one. And China, I'm sure that China is lying about some of its numbers, but it's not lying about everything. And it's certainly, as time goes on, China's lying about its numbers. We're much better than them in America. We used to say that. I don't know anybody who's saying that America is handling this better than China did. And part of the thing is that if you're in charge and responsible for the lives of Americans, you better use every single medicine that is available that you have tested and seen it should be useful. You shouldn't say, well, that medicine is coming from a country that we don't like and that we're punishing them, so we're going to punish them by not taking their medicine and letting Americans die. That makes no sense to me. So a lot of these things aren't really predictions. They're what I call blueprint prophecies. They're pretending to be predictions, but really they are saying, look, this is how we would be a better country or a better people or a better company if you did this, and then it spells out the prediction. But sometimes people like predictions better than they like just being told what to do. Yeah. Americans have a chip on their shoulder and they don't really want to be told what to do. So you have to package the cod liver oil or whatever the medicine is. So, how some parents will get their kids to eat by going, yeah, it's like an airplane. Whoa. They'll do all these games. So packaging them as predictions actually gets people to take advice at a policy level And so I've had my advice taken by, I don't know, 40 governments around the world.
So
because I can put it in a form that they like to have.
So rather than doing the airplane, we're going to do a little roundabout. I'm going to tangent out just a little short roundabout and then come right back into a lot of the stuff you were hitting on, because that's where you really spend a lot of time is around Corona and China and things like that. But the little roundabout, there's a big prediction you put out there years ago. You still have 6 months, 3 months, 4 months left for it to come true. And it looked like it was pretty close. Do you know what I'm talking about?
You're probably talking about the unification of the Korean Peninsula.
Exactly.
Yeah, see, I'm also a mind reader. I'm a telepath. So, yeah, I predicted that before the Trump administration left office, that we would see the unification of the Korean Peninsula. And I did that, put that out a day before I gave a talk to 500 people in Seoul at this D10E conference there. And people thought, oh my God, that's the craziest thing I ever heard. And then a couple days later, Trump announced he was meeting with the leader of North Korea for a summit. And people went, wait, what? Where did this come from? And so, but, you know, with a lot of these things, I think that this is still on track. I'm not retracting it. I'm not saying I'm wrong. But it's, you know, it's one of those things. It's not what Americans think. Americans always have this idea that if the Korean Peninsula unifies, then it's all going to be like South Korea. Part of the reason is right now, the US and China are starting to drop the facades and are trying to show their warrior face to each other. And so China is not going to leave US troops 1 hour flight from their mainland coast. So, you know, that's part of the reason for the unification. It's to say that there's not a need for US troops there anymore.
Interesting. So let's talk about that with China, because you and I've spoken about that for years. China has a publicly stated goal, China 2025. There's a lot of things China's been doing for years.
Made in China 2025.
Yeah,
you have
made
to say
in
the
China.
whole thing.
Yeah, made in China 2025. Even the term year of snake terms of service I got from you when we were sitting down in Santa Monica. So this aspect of China doing nefarious things, but they're also pretty upfront about what they're trying to do. Let's talk about the coronavirus.
Well, let's be clear. Some people in China are upfront about what they're doing. Some are not. There's this delusion in America that there's a unified position in China, and there's always some opposition. But it's just, you have to know people who can trust you not to reveal their sources, not to out them and quote them, because they could come to harm. But I've been going to China since 1988, and I have proven myself to be a friend of China. So in times when they really needed somebody to stick up for them, like when they were going for most favored nation trading status and joining the World Trade Organization, I was outspoken and trying to help them. So they have a big, thick file on me, and I've been making predictions about them, and my predictions about them don't have mistakes in them.
And so with where we are right now with Corona, CV-19 coronavirus, you've been studying that a lot. You've been not only posting a lot, you're prolific in your research and posting. Anybody that doesn't follow you, I always encourage them to. But what's your feeling and status on where we are right now with the pandemic in terms of how far are we through this curve? What do you think's going to happen? What are you willing to say about where you believe it actually came from and originated? Just talk to me about where your mind is right now on what's going on with the virus.
Well, there are times in history when science becomes unified and wrong. So there are many cases where people have said that you could buy the opinion of scientists. And what we have right now is we see what assholes viral gain of function researchers are. So you basically have people who are doing what's called dual use gain of function, which means on the one hand, you're making viruses that are upgraded in their lethality and their contagion and all kinds of other things. On the other hand, you're supposed to be coming up with medical treatments. And the gold standard for this is the woman who, quote unquote, discovered SARS and, you know, researched MERS and discovered SARS-CoV-2, Zhengli Shi. And what we see is the gain of function researchers are all rallying behind her and saying, oh no, it couldn't have been made in a lab. But she has a long trail of bloody fingerprints called scientific publications. And what I see in all these people who say it couldn't have been made in a lab is they never cite her papers where she's claiming that she genetically altered viruses. So there's one from June 2008 where it says, yeah, we couldn't get SARS to infect the human lung. But then we changed the amino acids from 310 to 538. Notice how specific I'm being? Yeah. And then it was able to attach to the ACE2 receptor, and we were able to infect the human lung. Or there's something they also never include, which is SARS-CoV-WIV1. So this morning I did an interview and I was wearing an Hermès tie. Notice me talking about Hermès tie. Ooh, I've got an Hermès tie. Well, they were doing that. They were branding their virus. They were so happy about them creating this virus that they put their own brand name on it. Nobody ever mentions that. Like, why would you put your brand name on a virus if you're ashamed of it? And so if you Google SARS-CoV-WIV1, Wuhan Institute of Virology, you will see a paper by Americans who go, you know, we tried to infect mice with this, but the mice, we couldn't infect them. So we had to go to transgenic mice that had human genes in the mouse, and then we were able to infect it. And thanks Zhenli Shi for giving us this virus, this SARS-CoV-2, that we could experiment that was right on the border. And gee, what was really weird is that these mice, when they gave birth, they actually stopped having ACE2 receptors. The mice genetically that survived in the next generation didn't have ACE2 receptors. That's interesting to me, right? That's a huge success. Imagine if we could have parents who got some treatment and then they didn't have ACE2 receptors so that they were immune to this. Doesn't that sound like something we'd be talking about? These guys are like whistling past the cemetery. Yeah, pay no attention to all these 50 papers on genetic engineering and the fact that these viruses that Zhenli Shi has been paid $6 million to work on are GMOs. They're genetically modified organisms. Yeah. And I'm not saying viruses are alive. They're not alive, but they are modified. And they're modified using ferrets and civets and things like that. So surprise, this virus affects dogs, cats, tigers, bats, maybe pangolins, if we talk about that sequence, but they affect mink and civets and mice and rats. And how do you get so many different species of an animal taking a virus without any lab being involved anywhere? It's just not believable. If it was so easy for a virus to come along that would jump from a bat to a human and then infect dogs, we wouldn't be kissing and letting dogs kiss our face. We'd be going, hey, if your dog is sneezing or sick, don't go quarantine your dog. Don't go anywhere near that. But we don't have to worry about catching viruses from dogs, you know, because they just don't jump to 7 different species in a matter of 4 months. Yeah. And so I just think that it's kind of amazing how much crap people are asked to swallow by people who were paid millions. And if you look at the field as a whole, they were paid billions of dollars to engineer viruses to kill and harm humans. And what they discovered in Vietnam, and maybe they knew it before, some people claim it was Vietnam, some before, is it's better not to kill someone. It's better to wound them so that you take out multiple people having to take care of them. So what could be better if you want to attack an enemy than to take a huge segment of society and make them weak and require massive medical care, so much so that to avoid overwhelming the doctors, you shut down the economy. So to me, this is all just too perfectly aligned with all military doctrine of unrestricted warfare. And we have these things that are indisputable. Like, for instance, China, we know China's population is 22% of world population. And we know that they make 40% of the gloves, masks, gowns, etc. And they claim that they have 3% of the cases. So they have domestic production of twice what their population is and 13 times as much as they say that their cases are. So why were they sending thousands of people to buy retail gloves and masks and gowns and disinfectants at Lowe's and Orchard Hardware and cleaning out our shelves in the US and in the UK and in Australia? Why did they send thousands of people buying it? Why was the biggest year for American exports of these products, masks and stuff, in 10 years, to China in February? And why is there such massive things? Why is China holding on to its own supply and importing from us if it was sharing all that information? So we know that there was a level of deception involved, and we know that they're patient zero. Like, go look up the patient zero for Finland. It's an old, sick Chinese woman who in the middle of January in Lapland, if you've ever been to Lapland, in the summer, it's light all the time because it's so far north. In the winter, it's dark all the time. Why, instead of visiting family, would an old Chinese woman go to Lapland where it's dark all the time and be patient zero and infect all the people in, who came afterwards in Finland? Like, there's just too many patient zeros who have no reason for being there. And all this stuff that's like the scientists are like the monkeys, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And it's because they don't want their field to have a spotlight on it. And the spotlight is, hey, genetic engineering of bioweapons is illegal under the Geneva Protocol, not the Geneva Convention, the Geneva Protocol. But China is acting honorably. So I'm happy to defend China with facts. And here's a fact. The United States signed that treaty and we just disregard it, just like we signed the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, the most signed treaty. We ignore it. So China put in a provision that said, well, we'll honor this treaty, but only if other people do. And if other people disregard this treaty and make bioweapons, well, then we're not going to be bound by it. So China, even if they made this as a bioweapon, would be acting more lawfully than the other nations that are doing this research.
So I have two questions for you, Alex, and they're a little different. I'll let you pick which one. If the genesis of the virus came from a lab, which I'm like you, I believe it did, then do you believe that there was also the creation of a vaccine and some of the patents and things that were filed around a possible vaccine? The second question, which may dovetail into that one, I was fascinated. I was in Hong Kong, October, November. It was interesting to me that Hong Kong and Beijing and Shenzhen and these big cities in China that are bigger than New York didn't have massive outbreaks and cases. So is there a secret vaccine? Was travel shut down? Is there an inoculation program we're not aware of? I'm not looking at conspiracy stuff. I'm interested in your thought process on vaccine possibility and why some of these other cities weren't affected like other areas around the world.
I don't think anyone can say definitively there is or there isn't an existing vaccine. Bill Gates is proceeding in a way that seems to indicate that he thinks that a vaccine is the solution, even though it's a little odd to be so confident because, number one, there's never been a vaccine for a coronavirus.
Yeah.
And number two, look at how long it took for there to even be a treatment for AIDS and how much money. In other words, these things take years. They're not done overnight. And the fact that people already have things ready to go and they're already being tested and they're looking for volunteers, that's a little suspicious. What's also suspicious is that Zheng Lishi, who's the Rosetta Stone to understanding all this, with her 16 years of working on SARS, only came up with this patent for remdesivir, which she didn't invent. It's a fake attempt to steal Gilead's property, which as far as I know is a bit of a theft from the American taxpayer because U.S. AMRID paid $79 million towards it. So how the U.S. taxpayer pays for this stuff and then it's not open source, yeah. I don't know. Like, we both like cryptocurrency. The crypto people are incredibly honorable in the sense, despite all the bad rap they get, and that this thing is open source. Cryptocurrency is this incredible Santa Claus of gifts of a mountain of open source software. And so why isn't remdesivir open sourced? I like to think that I coined the term open source medicine back in 2009. There's an article you can type in, Alex Lightman, open source medicine. But that should be part of it. We should have a pot of things that are proprietary, but then there are things that are the common heritage of humanity. And remdesivir is clearly belonging in that pot. The same with hydroxychloroquine and a whole lot of other things. After 20 years, you're supposed to make this stuff available to all kinds of people. And maybe we should extend drug treatment so that it's 20 years from the time that you get your approval from the FDA or some other organization. But there comes a point at which enough is enough. It should be all generic. So I don't have evidence one way or another for a vaccine. And I only make statements where I can actually back it up with
Yeah.
a scientific or medical reference. But it is improbable that last time I looked, Shanghai had 5 deaths, a city that's bigger than New York, that is a high-speed train away from Wuhan.
Right.
And so, but what we do know is that there are multiple strains of this, and that the strain that's in New York is much stronger than the strain that's in LA. And I was saying this very early on. I've been saying this for months, and I've had people give me a hard time. And someone was saying, oh, and then New York Times wrote an article that said, look at what happened. People from New York left and went to all these communities and started the harder strain. So California wouldn't own, with 40 million people, wouldn't only have 2,600 deaths versus New York having, 23, 24,000 at the time this was made, if we had the same strain. Because I can just tell you from living near Venice, Venice is a cesspool of people who have no interest in doing social distancing.
Yeah.
They have made little dung heaps that they're living in on the Venice boardwalk filled with garbage and basically clustering as close as you want. They're not washing hands, bathing. There's a stench in the air. And this is people who just don't care. And the city of LA wants to take law-abiding citizens and say, you must stay in, you must have social distancing. But the police won't get out of their car in Venice because they're afraid of being bit and then going to the hospital. So the police have effectively decided who's law-abiding, let's intimidate them, and who is just going to gather up and say, screw you, and then they'll just ignore those people. I went to the beach along with thousands of other people to watch the bioluminescence.
Yeah.
And there were police just riding around at the edge of it, running their lights, but nobody was taking them seriously. And so that's what the homeless in LA have figured out, that all they have to do is cluster really close together and the cops will give them a wide berth. So this lockdown in America, I'm basically saying that California's lockdown isn't a real lockdown. And the only reason we have such a low fatality rate in California is because we have a milder strain. It's not because of Gavin Newsom. It's not because of Garcetti. It's just because we don't have the same thing that they have in New York. But when New Yorkers can start to travel again, if this New York Times article is correct, we're going to have a nastier strain, and all of a sudden, all the kind of cocky Californians who are not worried about it, are going to have a rude surprise.
So then, in kind of closing the loop here, what's your thought process then on, not Shanghai, Shenzhen and Beijing, these bigger cities in China, even Hong Kong, bullet train, they weren't affected in the same way the rest of the world was. Do you think that's because of limited travel? Do you think it was something where the Wuhan market let people out? I'm just kind of curious your thoughts.
Well,
because
first of all, there's no evidence for the Wuhan market cover story. I mean, I don't know why people keep talking about the Wuhan market. Where's patient zero? And why is China not looking for patient zero? There was this very weak attempt to say that the shrimp seller in the Wuhan market was patient zero. And then by paragraph 3 or 4 in the article, it says, when she got to the hospital, it was filled with like 25 other people who had this. So how do you have an article on patient zero when she's not just the 26th patient of that hospital? And Wuhan, with a city of 11 million people, has dozens of hospitals. So there's no factual way that we can say that it was from a bat. And all this RATG 13, there's no sample of this. It doesn't exist. It could have just been simply typed up in a word processing program by Zhen Lixi, and she could have said that it existed. There's none of her papers, and she publishes like 50 papers. It's not mentioned in any of her papers for 7 years. So there's all kinds of weirdnesses about this. But within this whole thing, I took those bullet trains and I thought they were amazing. And I've written a bunch of China's doing great. I'm amazed at China's success. So I think that China is doing amazing things in the world, but it's not, I guess that that there's always going to be suspicion that China had better treatments of this because of the fact that they didn't have infections in Beijing and Shanghai and other cities like American cities. It just doesn't make sense.
So let's do this. Last question, and as much as you're comfortable and confident answering, because I know you have sources around the world, how do you believe the virus not only started, but proliferated as it did around the world? Just give me a couple minutes in your mind of how you think
Well,
it
sure. I mean,
started
look,
and spread so quickly.
governments don't fund research for nothing. So you have Jen Shi publishing this article saying, "Hey, look at us. We changed these amino acids and attached the ACE2 receptor." Now, what the United States could have done is say, "Oh my God, this is a treaty violation. Oh my God, Bill Gates' prediction of a lung choking virus that he did with John F. Kennedy Jr. and George Magazine is coming true. Stop that research." Instead, the United States said, "Ooh, let's go and hire her." And they brought her to the United States, and they treated her like a basketball player. And she worked with Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina. But this research was pretty scary, and it was so scary that the Obama administration went, let's ban this. And so after it was banned, she went to China, but she had believers. There are people who believe she's the best genetically modifier of viruses in the world. And so they funded her research on an ongoing basis. So part of the reason that there are people who will cover for her and cover for China is because they're complicit. And if she goes down with it, they go down as well. And so, so the United States has kind of covered this up. And part of the problem for Donald Trump is that he's the one who lifted the ban in 2017. But if you wanted to know, I think that there is evidence that it was deliberately created as a joint venture between US and China. It was deliberately released. It was deliberately spread. It was that the US retail shelves were denuded of supplies on an intentional basis, and that there are people in China who are trying to exploit this, and there are people in China who are apologizing and saying, no, this really wasn't us, and that it's just an awful situation that's going to lead to a massive conflict. But the problem is that both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee and the presumptive Republican nominee, both have conflicts of interest with China. So they're going to do a lot of rhetoric, but in the end, they have compromising information on them. And so Americans are left to kind of fend for themselves and try to swim around. And it's not helped by Donald Trump saying things like, oh, the invisible enemy, the invisible enemy. Like, that's just like dog whistling. And it seems made to kind of spark conspiracy theorists, because then they can take anything that's invisible, that's their pet project, and say, well, that's who he's really referring to. Like, they should, he should be very specific about it. And it doesn't help that you have someone like Anthony Fauci who says that, oh yeah, we're only going to have 60,000 deaths 2 weeks, 3 weeks before we hit 60,000 dead in America. And then we change the way the CDC keeps the statistics just so that it's like, the statistics look better. There's all kinds of changing the numbers and fudging the numbers during an election campaign. And I think that ultimately we should have an amnesty for China to basically just say, look, we're not going to declare war. We're not going to do anything in retribution, but just come clean and admit it. And then anything after, let's say, the month of May that you don't admit, then, we're just going to look at it in a whole different light. And as I've said before on Brock Pierce's show, I think that nobody should be doing any of this genetic modification without having liability insurance. So we're both living in the LA area. People make a lot of movies. You can't make a big budget movie picture without being bonded. You have to get a completion bond for it. I think you should get a completion bond for all your viruses. And if your virus gets loose and it hurts people, well, then the bond pays off. So how dangerous can it be? Because we can just look at the career of Jen Shi, 16 years of doing dual use. And what does she file for patents for treatments? Remdesivir and hydroxychloroquine. Like, that's not, considering how much danger she put the world in, that's not equitable. There's like a 10 out of 10 for danger of gain of function and a 1 out of 10 in terms of helping solve problems for the world.
Side, yeah. Wow. All right, Alex, what I'm going to do is I could talk to you for hours. That's why I'm so thankful that you were able to carve some time out and come on, and I greatly appreciate it. I want to bring you back in a couple of months and see where we are on all of this. So Again, greatly appreciate you coming, spending the
well,
time.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I've heard people refer to this as the dark decade. How bad do you think this decade's going to be based on what you've seen for the first 4 or 5 months?
Because again, kind of like you, I'm dealing with the administration. I was asked something similar, and I said, I have 2 words for you: California beaches. And they looked at me, and what I meant by that is, I don't think it's going to be as dark as everybody's making it, because people are already out. People aren't, I'm not saying I think a lot of this was overhyped, or people aren't going to be as concerned about it when they get back out in the environment. I think we're going to open up very quickly. I think travel's going to return. I think a lot of things are going to get back quickly. The dark side of it, though, Alex, for you and I, is I think there's more problems like coronavirus out there that are going to come upon us. So from a societal standpoint, I think people are just going to, kind of go back to normal. But from what I think could happen in terms of this kind of virus again, I think there's some more scary things, because you've been studying on it. The gain of function is what's going to be next, what's going to be worse, what's going to be more, virulent in terms of how it attacks people. And I think there's some scary things that could come along. But I think society's just going to go back to, hey, it didn't affect me. If I have to wear a mask, great, but I'm going back to the bar and going back to the beach.
Well, the beach is a lot healthier than the bar, because ultraviolet, kills it, but beer does not.
Not the yeast. So, all right. Appreciate it, Alex. I will bring you back for sure. Steve and me, the Bullseye Guy. Tune in next week. Another great guest coming, but big thanks to Alex Lightman. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Steve. Cheers.